Welcome! It's Ashley from Demystifying Your Health. Thank you for joining me today. In this episode, we're going to be talking about ADHD. And this diagnosis amongst kids has been on the rise for the past several years. Why? And what can you do to help your child if they have ADHD? Let's find out. ADHD is short for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And there are three main types. You have primarily inattentive, primarily hyperactive or impulsive, or combined. And this last one is the most common one. And the symptoms usually are difficulty maintaining attention, hyperactivity, or impulsive behavior. So these symptoms appear in all aspects of the person's life, or they are displayed continually. So this means it doesn't just happen at school or just at home, it happens in all areas. So it negatively impacts every single part of the person's life. It usually starts before the age of 12 and is seen more often in boys. The classifications are mild, moderate, or severe, and the exact cause is unknown, but thought to be related to genetics, the person's environment, and developmental factors. Let's take a closer look at what inattention and hyperactivity impulsivity might look like. So for inattention, the person might make careless mistakes when it comes to schoolwork. They can have trouble staying focused on tasks or play. They are unable to follow instructions, which this often means that they don't finish schoolwork or chores. They dislike or avoid tasks that require them to have focused mental effort, for example, homework. And they're easily distracted, they appear not to listen, and they're unable to organize tasks. For hyperactivity impulsivity, the person's constantly in motion. This means they're fidgeting, they're tapping their hands or feet, they are squirming in their seat, they have difficulty staying seated, they often talk too much, and they have a hard time waiting for their turn. So this means they often blurt out answers to questions even when they're not supposed to, or they interrupt others who are talking. And they struggle to do activities quietly. So all of this can obviously have significant impact on the person's ability to not only learn, but just to be able to function in everyday life. So it can lead to academic struggles or failure, judgment by peers and other adults, low self-esteem, and depression. And it does increase the chances of accident or injuries, because often since they're so active, the kids have a hard time sitting and staying still and are climbing on things or whatever they should not be doing and end up injured. And it can lead to alcohol and drug use or abuse. And it's important to note that while the ADHD itself does not cause other psychological or developmental conditions, it often coexists with other mental health disorders like conduct disorders, anxiety disorders, other learning challenges. So it's important to note that if your child is diagnosed with ADHD, make sure that you're having them screened for any other additional mental health or psychological or developmental issues, so that way those can be addressed as well. When it comes to treating ADHD, there are several things to consider. The first is medications. There are actually neurochemical changes within the person's brain and body that can be somewhat corrected if they're taking the right medicine for them. And there are a couple of different classes. The first are stimulants or psychostimulants. And the first subcategory of this are amphetamines, which are Adderall or Vyvanse. And then the next is methylphenidates, which is Ritalin and Concerta. Obviously, there's some concern about a child being on stimulants, especially for extended periods of time. So there are other non-stimulant options, such as Strattera, Wellbutrin, Intuniv, Tenex, Catapres, and Capve. Your doctor will help you decide what's best for you and your child, given their severity of their illness and the situation. So it's important to realize that some of these are short-acting, some of these are long-acting, and your child might need to be on a combination of them, might need to have to go through several different trial and error periods to find the right combination that works for them. And as they grow and their bodies obviously get bigger and they mature, they might need a different medicine or a lesser dose or a higher dose. So just be prepared that as you're going through the medication portion of this, it will change. It's not going to be one and then it's going to be that's it. You're going to have to go through where, trial and error is the big thing here. The other huge component is therapy. So when the child is younger, behavior therapy helps them to learn what is appropriate behavior. Then, when they get a little bit older, psychotherapy helps them to be able to talk about what they're feeling and their emotions. And then parenting skills, which is really helpful for parents, because obviously when your child has ADHD, how you interact with them might be a little bit different than how you interact with a typically developing child. And part of this is lifestyle. So some areas under this that are key is you want to be consistent. Whatever the rules are, those are the rules every single time. This helps your child to know what to expect. The next thing is having a regular schedule. This means that by doing that, then they know, this is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3. They're less likely to forget something. Then make sure your expectations are clear. Make sure your child knows what those are. Obviously, it must be in age-appropriate terms. Use timeouts and appropriate discipline as necessary. This helps them to discover boundaries and know when they've gone beyond them. You also want to help them develop organizational skills, because obviously this is something that they struggle with. And you want to use simple worded directions. You don't want to give them a multi-step process. You want to say, this is what we're going to do, and then this is the next thing you're going to do. Make sure you're making eye contact with them, so that way you know that they heard you. And make sure you're not multitasking when you're doing this, because obviously you don't want to set a bad example. And then a big thing here is you want to remain calm. And sometimes this means taking a break. Make sure you're showing your child affection, because it can be incredibly challenging and frustrating sometimes to deal with a child who has ADHD. So by following all of these things, you're going to help your child have the best chance at succeeding and being able to overcome the challenges that are set by ADHD. Unfortunately, since the exact cause of ADHD is not known, there's no specific surefire way to prevent it from occurring. So some general considerations. You want to avoid anything that can cause harm during fetal development. So obviously avoid alcohol, avoid smoking, avoid other toxins. And then you want to protect your child from environmental toxins when they're younger and as they get older. So there's things like lead exposure into paint, asbestos in the walls, anything like that. And then you also want to limit screen time, especially during the first 5 years of their child's life. And this is because as research is being done, it's showing that there could be a very high correlation between ADHD development and how much screen time a child had when they were younger. Remember, ADHD is diagnosed before the age of 12. Obviously, when kids are little, toddlers, they're all very active and moving about, so it's sort of hard to judge at that point. Most of the time, the diagnosis is not made until a child enters school, because obviously this is a structured environment and they're having to go through, sitting there and learning, which is not typical of a child who is a toddler or a preschooler. So this is why diagnoses are usually made in kindergarten or first grade or shortly thereafter. So you want to make sure you're limiting screen time, keep your child active, keep them engaged prior to them starting school. And that's going to help hopefully reduce the chances of having ADHD for them and obviously the complications that it can cause long term. ADHD is definitely a challenging situation, not only for the child who has it, but also for their family. But with early intervention and the right treatment, then the long-term consequences are going to be significantly reduced. Thank you for joining me today. If you found the information to be valuable and helpful, please like, subscribe, share, let your friends know about us. If you have questions or comments, I'd absolutely love to hear from you. Make sure you put them below. Otherwise, you can send me an email. I'm usually highly responsive to that as well. But otherwise, until next time, you guys stay healthy.